J.J. Watt is coming to Pittsburgh. J.J. Watt is the savior. J.J. Watt and his brothers are going to lead the Pittsburgh Steelers to another Super Bowl. That's how some of you sound right now. That's the mindset of Pittsburgh Steelers fans after learning J.J. Watt was even available, after learning J.J. Watt asked for and was granted his release by the Houston Texans. Steeler fans want J.J. Watt more than they want anything else right now. But on this episode of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, SteelersNow.com, I'm Mike Asti, and I'm here to tell you why the Steelers should not prioritize signing J.J. Watt. Why adding J.J. Watt would be nice, but should not be a top priority for the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason. Now, J.J. Watt is a Hall of Famer. J.J. Watt's one of the greatest defensive players of all time. J.J. Watt's one of the greatest players at his position of all time. J.J. Watt's won that Defensive Player of the Year award multiple times, something his younger brother should have won this past season. I certainly threw a vote his way, and probably will win at some point in the future. But J.J. Watt's best days are behind him. He's not going to win any more Defensive Player of the Year awards. His younger brother's going to win those. He's not. That's at least the likely scenario at his age. It's incredibly unlikely that J.J. Watt would all of a sudden become the best defensive player in football again in his career. So if the Steelers would sign him, or whoever signs him, would not be getting the best of J.J. Watt's career. J.J. Watt in his prime, again, could impact a game by himself and led some Texans team to the playoffs that otherwise wouldn't have been there. And J.J. Watt deserves better, for sure. J.J. Watt was in the playoffs a couple of years ago. Then they kind of rip up the team. They bounce Hopkins. Team just continuously loses talent. They missed this past season. He told Deshaun Watson he deserved better, and he does, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. Probably not going to be leaving the Texans because that's a different position, different age, no matter what some in the national media may say or try to spin that into. But J.J. Watt couldn't do more, because J.J. Watt's not been on the field as much as he was in his younger days. J.J. Watt's been injury-riddled the past few years, really was his entire career, and he's also not as impactful as he once was. Not a knock on him. Again, he's a Hall of Famer. He's a legend. He's one of the greatest defensive players of all time, certainly this era. But he's just getting older, and the injuries he's had almost all over his body, including a pec tear, everywhere, his arm, legs, body, chest, it's all been under the knife at one point or another in his career. So how many games would he play? How often would you get J.J. Watt on the field? This is a Steelers defense that you have to remember has dealt with injuries the past few years, including this past season. It was injury-riddled. So if J.J. Watt, a guy you want to bring in and say he's going to be security, if somebody else, like a Devin Butch, who's much younger, would get hurt, J.J. Watt's not really a security blanket in terms of guys missing time and you can throw J.J. Watt in. J.J. Watt might be somebody who gets hurt. How much time can J.J. Watt give you on the field? That's a reason right there maybe to have some pause about signing J.J. Watt. Certainly about paying him what he's going to command, even if he takes a little bit of a reduction, that's going to be an issue. The salary cap. That's another reason why the Steelers should not prioritize J.J. Watt. You are up against the cap. In fact, the Steelers are over the cap even after Marquise Pouncey's retirement. And we know there's questions still surrounding the quarterback position, question marks about what they're going to do at running back, question marks about Juju Smith-Schuster's future, question marks all over this team. And the salary cap's not going to budge for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's not going to get any easier to deal with. So if you have a cap that is going to be so difficult for you to deal with, and so many question marks around this team and so much work that may need to be done, and even if the cap is calmed down and say different moves and different decisions are made that allows that cap to then be better for you, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, that you get under that cap and you have some wiggle room there, even if that would be the scenario, the Steelers have so much to fix. And this is not to say the Steelers were a horrible team this past year. The Steelers were 11-0 at one point, and even though I've discussed this on past shows here on PSL, again, find it all through the channel, over their Steelers on the Steelers Now site as well in the Steelers Talk section, and you can even just search my tweets. Yes, they might have been a little lucky to get to 11-0. They weren't playing that fantastic, but they won a division. They were 11-0 at one point. They still had to stack those wins. But, of course, they ended the year suffering a devastating postseason loss. But that playoff loss does not mean they were horrendous overall in the year. There's still a lot of talent on the Steelers team. And despite all the questions and the cap not being friendly, it's not like the Steelers team can go ahead and only win 2 games next year. They're still going to be around and still a talented team that certainly can be a contender depending on what happens this offseason. But because you're not going to get the same player that was once J.J. Watt, because you don't know how many games he's going to even play for you, because he couldn't be that security blanket and fill in if somebody else gets hurt, because it's very likely he could be hurt. He maybe is more in that James Harrison role at the end of his career. And J.J. Watt, certainly better than that right now. I don't mean to necessarily peg him in that role, but in terms of games played, J.J. Watt's missing half the season most of the time. He's not played a full season in a while. So he's not who he once was. He's not a player that should command a mega deal or that you would want to risk your entire salary cap to pay a mega deal for, because you're paying for the future, not the past. And J.J. Watt's future is not going to be better than his past, even if his brothers are on the team and even if Permanis wants to go nuts with you Steeler fans and change the name of the restaurant. But who are you really signing? More importantly, what do you really need to do? The salary cap might even be a better reason why not to prioritize J.J. Watt if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah, maybe he can turn lightning in a bottle and he'll get really, really motivated to be out of Houston and really be on a contender, because even though he led them to multiple playoff appearances, no one really ever said when the Texans got into the playoffs, as recent as even 2 years ago, that they were going to go ahead and win the Super Bowl. Okay, he was never really on a Super Bowl contending team his entire career, which, again, is one of the greatest careers for a defensive player of all time. He's done everything except for be on a truly great team that has a chance at getting him a ring. And I hope he gets the ring, honestly. He has other options. He has other teams interested outside the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I would love covering him. I would love him to be on the Pittsburgh Steelers. It would be cool if he somehow can take a major family discount or something can happen short term. I don't see a long-term deal being possible. I don't see a mega deal. I don't see tons of money being possible. It just factually isn't based on the salary cap. But because you don't know the player you're going to get, because you don't know the games he can play and how much he can be on the field in his injury history and the money that he's still going to command, even if it is a discount, I wouldn't prioritize J.J. Watt. But most of all, I wouldn't prioritize J.J. Watt because the Steelers need other things. The Steelers' needs do not fit in to bringing in J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt does 2 things really well. Now, more than ever, because he's a specialty. He can't do as much as he was before. He can't impact the game as much everywhere on the field. He specializes in doing 2 major things really well still when he is on the field. And these were still the 2 things he did the best earlier in his career when even he was winning Defensive Player of the Year. Create pressure and do something that will lead to a sack. So he creates pressure and causes quarterbacks to just be all off kilter, causes quarterback fits, still can certainly do that, still can impact games that way, and can lead to sacks. He might not get the sack as often as he used to. He's not as fast and agile, but he can do things on the field that can lead to somebody else getting sacked. Maybe JJ being there will allow his younger brother to win the Defensive Player of the Year because he'll stack even more stats up. Apparently, they weren't enough even when he led in every category over Aaron Donald. And he's more of a, JJ's more of a comparable to Aaron Donald based on position than TJ. So we get it in terms of the stats of that conversation. But maybe playing with an Aaron Donald will even help TJ more. It'll certainly make the defense better. It'll cause even more pressure, probably lead to more sacks. We get it. JJ can still be a productive member of a quality team. Certainly can. And I'd love to see him be on a winning team and be a productive member of a team and play more games and be healthier than he's been in recent years. Maybe that'll happen by him even being more motivated than ever before. And I'd imagine his decision might not be money motivated, so maybe he'll take that discount. Maybe he'll fit himself into your cap once you tweak things when the Steelers finally work that cap around for this offseason. Maybe that could happen. Maybe he would even do it on a short term. Maybe he wants to join his brothers, so maybe he would make the money work. because maybe it's not about money at this point in his career. Maybe it's about winning since he hasn't really had that. So I get it. Okay, that debunks some of my previous arguments. But again, the Steelers' needs, and this is contingent on Ben Roethlisberger, quarterback, running back. There are things the Steelers need outside just defensive help. And they could use some. Sure, they weren't playing as well defensively at the end of the year as they were earlier when they were one of the better defenses in football. But J.J. Watt causes the quarterback fits, creates pressure. What he does leads to sacks. What does that sound like? The Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense. What J.J. Watt does well is exactly what the Steelers defense does well. The Steelers defense causes pressure for a quarterback and does things that will lead to sacks. Hopefully then takeaways for the Steelers. That's also their plan, but leads to sacks. The Steelers have the record for the sack streak in NFL history now. They set that this past season. They've had at least one sack a game for 4+ years, for crying out loud, 70+ games, including, again, this past season. And that postseason game without a sack doesn't matter. It's just regular season. So the Steelers are able to create pressure. The Steelers are usually more often than not able to generate sacks, multiple sacks. And next year, with Devin Bush missing more than half the year, he should be back healthy, and he should be there again to be part of this defense, which also can cause fit to the quarterback and lead to more sacks. So creating pressure for an opposing quarterback is not the Steelers' problem. What J.J. Watt does well, despite, again, he's done it better than anybody else when he was in his prime. He still does it really, really well now, even though he's not in his prime anymore. But what J.J. Watt does well, it's the same thing as a duplicate. He would be a luxury, not a necessity for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers' defense creates pressure and generates sacks. That's what it usually does through an entire season. It's been doing it for years. Whether they missed the playoffs, whether Ben's the quarterback, whether it was Duck or Mason, no matter what was going on this past season, winning a division and then the miserable playoff loss, that's what the Steelers have been doing consistently. One of the few things they've been doing consistently for 4+ years. Maybe longer, even, honestly. It's the Steelers' way, kind of. They've almost always been doing that. That's what JJ does well. So why would you add a luxury that's still going to be on a high price to just duplicate the same thing you're already doing well when you need help at running back? The Steelers' running game was god-awful this past season. I think everyone now agrees James Conner is not a featured back. They don't really have one. They have a bunch of complementary pieces. They still have talent at the wide receiver position, even without Juju. You pluck him out of there. But Claypool then would have to step up. They would need to diversify each different position. Maybe adding one more wouldn't hurt. Certainly, there are other positions. The Steelers secondary always has been a concern in recent years, even though different pieces have stepped up at times. How much longer will you get production out of Joe Hayden? Steven Nelson has not nearly been what they thought he would be. So there are different pieces there that could be improved. Offensive line, defensive line, certainly holes for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that matters to whether Ben's the quarterback or anyone else is the quarterback for the offensive line. You need to hold that guy and protect that guy. And while Ben Roethlisberger didn't have as bad of a year as some may say, his numbers were similar to Baker Mayfield this past year, he didn't have a good year either. Okay, he certainly is older. He certainly has had his best days behind him. He certainly is not an elite quarterback in terms of his play anymore. And he certainly makes too many mistakes, and he has had games in which he helped lead to a loss, even though there certainly were games he was great. And it's very likely that Mason Rudolph wouldn't even be as good as Ben was this past season. Same thing with Josh Dobbs or whoever's there. I don't think they're going to bring in some major piece or spend tons of money on someone. There's nobody in the draft to where the Steelers are going to draft they're going to be able to go get. Haskins probably isn't the answer either, even though there's tons of talent there. And if I had to bet, I would say if it's not Ben, it's probably Mason starting. But that means you need to protect him even more. That means the offensive line is even a bigger deal, even more. And even over there on the defensive line, that's certainly part of things too. That needs improved as well. There are so many facets of the Pittsburgh Steelers that regardless who is at those positions, regardless whether it's an incumbent player or somebody else, regardless to any decisions this offseason of Ben Roethlisberger or anybody else, need improved. Have to be improved for this team to really have championship aspirations, which a player like TJ Watt certainly believes they have. And certainly that is his goal, is to win a championship. Well, if that's the goal, and that's JJ's goal too now, obviously, there's no reason to leave Houston unless that's what you want. The Steelers need to do a lot in order to make that happen. So while adding J.J. Watt would be nice, it would be a luxury, it would be a cool story, and I'd love covering a Hall of Famer like that. The Pittsburgh Steelers should not prioritize signing J.J. Watt because we don't know how many games he's going to play. He is a health concern. His price tag is likely going to be too high, even if he does bring the discount down a little bit. And they have other needs. So the Pittsburgh Steelers need to do a lot this offseason. A lot needs to happen. But the Pittsburgh Steelers should not prioritize signing J.J. Watt because his price tag is going to be too high. He's been a shell of his former self the last several seasons. He's been injury prone. And what he does well is the same thing the Steelers already do well. In addition to all the needs of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Steelers needing so much more than just what J.J. Watt could bring. Didn't mean to pop the balloon. I'd love to have it happen too. I think it'd be cool. I'd love to see Watt brothers over there and have a sandwich. He probably would get a sandwich over there at Permanis. But is adding J.J. Watt really necessary? Is it the top priority for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Should it be? Those are questions you got to ask yourself. Because remember, there's a lot the Pittsburgh Steelers need to do this offseason. And in terms of a need, adding J.J. Watt is not one of them, even though certainly it would be cool and J.J. Watt would be a nice, helpful piece as a luxury to the team. Make sure to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, bottom of the video. Smash that button. Help us get our content to you. And thanks to our sponsors. It's free to do so. So really, there's no reason why not. Why not subscribe? Ask yourself that question. Find us all throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks, but most notably here, SteelersNow.com. Follow us on Twitter at PGH Steelers Now on Twitter, at PGH Sports Live on Twitter, and of course myself at Mike Asti 11. And again, I'd love for J.J. Watt to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. I'd love it. I think it'd be really, really cool. J.J. Watt as a Steeler would be a great story. It would be a lot of fun. It would be an NFL history story. It will be a story discussed for years and years and years to come throughout the National Football League. There would be NFL film documentaries, NFL Network documentaries forever. It would be a special sight to see those Watt brothers on the same team, to see JJ and TJ both probably head to the Hall of Fame someday on that same defense. Would be fantastic. But the Pittsburgh Steelers shouldn't prioritize a signing this offseason because it would be a cool feel-good story. The Pittsburgh Steelers shouldn't prioritize doing something this offseason because of the last name of somebody available. And the Pittsburgh Steelers should not prioritize signing J.J. Watt. Sorry.